The third and the last topic for today is injection. We used to look separately at SQL injection and cross-site scripting and all that. Now we have everything in a single category because it's different but very similar problems at the same time. And if we look at the top three, the top one is cross-site scripting. And as far as I'm aware, it has been for a while. And the next one is SQL injection. And the third one is external control of file name or path. In the context of Drupal, now compared to how much SQL injection problems there are or were in the industry in general, we are quite good at that in Drupal. And the reason for that is that we have this database abstraction APIs, which basically ensure that we write secure queries. Nonetheless, if you remember Drupal-geddon, that was a SQL injection problem. So we're not 100% secure, and we never will be. That's just the fact of life. But even in Drupal 6 times, Drupal was very successful at preventing SQL injection. On the other hand, cross-site scripting was something that was way more common. As if you remember, in Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 times, we had these functions called check plain and also check_XSS. And I'm pretty sure that like 90% of job interviews in Drupal industry had this question about what these functions do, or something along the lines, how do you handle unsecure user supplied content or something like that, because it was so important to know how to use these functions and to understand what is user supplied content and what is system content that never got touched or created by user. And I remember one really good question was, okay, so if we have an article on the news page, a comment is definitely a user supplied content, because generally most users can publish comments. So you want to handle that content with care. But then the next question was, okay, what about articles that are written by journalists or the staff? And the answer was, sure, it should be also considered unsafe, because you can have either people accidentally doing stupid things, or somebody tricking them into pasting some dangerous code somewhere and not being aware of, or we can have like rogue employees that want to do us harm, something like that. So that's definitely also something that we need to handle. But then I remember there was a presentation at one of the Drupal cons, and somebody asked, what about the machine name of taxonomy vocabulary? Should that be considered a safe string or an unsafe string? And the very common answer, predominant answer in the room was, oh, machine name is safe, of course. And the answer is no, it's not. And the reason it's not is that on most forms where we are creating, like in the specific example where we are creating taxonomy terms, the machine name will be auto-generated and displayed, but you also have this edit button next to it where you can change it. And any user that has permission to create taxonomy terms has permission to change the machine name and could inject something in there that is harmful. But since it's called a machine name, it's very unintuitive that this is something that could be abused by the user. And all these caveats made, working with these functions and understanding when to sanitize content before displaying it, basically, really hard. But then with Drupal 8, we switched the approach. With Drupal 8, we started sanitizing everything by default. So, we will sanitize everything no matter what, except if you tell Drupal not to. And this also improved the situation with cross-site scripting quite a lot. So while this is one example of making API more bulletproof, before we had really good API that protected us from cross-site scripting, and we relied on developers to use it correctly. Otherwise, it would not work. And that's why Drupal had a lot of cross-site scripting problems, not as core per se, but projects that were built with Drupal. And now we changed this API to be friendlier and more secure. So we improved the situation with that. So yeah, like 10 years ago, I would give you a whole lesson about how to use the APIs. Now I just want to bring the message over that, these systems are in place, and, it's nice to be aware that they are there, or should be aware that they are there, but they, for the most part, work out of the box. But, cross-site scripting and SQL injection is, not the only part of this story. Like, we also, for example, if you're using LDAP, you can do LDAP injection if you're doing LDAP queries, and using user-supplied filters, for example, to do that. So something to be aware of. Even there, you can expose yourself to dangerous situations if you're not sanitizing user-supplied input correctly. Another area that is really tricky is if you are evaluating code, like provided code. That's why the PHP module in Drupal 7 and in Drupal 6 was not the best idea, and that's why it was basically removed from the core, because it let anybody that would get access to some form that had something like this theoretically write PHP code that would run on the site. So if we can avoid things like that, like evaluating code that are provided by the user, or simply don't use UIs and things like that where people could write code. Like, code should be in the Git repository, and that's it. Sometimes we have situations where we have to do those things, and these are the situations where we have to be really careful to really understand what we are exposing ourselves to. So in the context of injection, I would also like to come back to the Form API. Form API has a lot of security checks in place. And sometimes are also the security checks that cause us headaches, because the forms won't behave in a way that we expect them to. And the most common thing that I see a lot, like even in contrib modules that are quite often used, you can still see like in the form, you have this form state object where the state of the form is stored. across requests and all that. And in there are two values. One is called input, and one is called values. And both of them store the data that was submitted by the user to the form. With one really important difference. The input attribute on form state object is the raw user data, like the way it came from the browser. And the values attribute is sanitized data and data that went through checks and validation. And sometimes, for example, when you limit validation errors in the form, Form API will simply remove everything that is not specific about the part of the form that you're dealing with. So things will disappear from the values attribute. And then in those cases, you can very often see people getting data from the input attribute. And that's where you're exposing yourself to the risk of being hacked. Because this is exactly the protection layer that Form API offers to you. And then as soon as you go and you use input for whatever reason, because data that you expected to be in the sanitized array is not there, you're basically at your own responsibility and at your own risk. So my recommendation here would be, don't use ever the raw input array. If the values that you are expecting are not in the sanitized array, then there is some other thing that you need to change for them to appear there. And here it comes down to understanding how Form API works and all that, and sometimes can be tricky, but never ever use the input array, because I'm not even sure why it's public. It should be private in my opinion, because it's meant for the internal use of the Form API and not for us to use it. So yeah, this is another example of an API that protects us quite a lot, but it's also easy to misuse it. Another API that we have is the cross-site request forgery protection. And that one is implemented on routing layer. And it's as easy as this. If we put the _CSRF_token true line into the route definition, then the protection will be enabled for this route. And all the links to this route will be generated with the CSRF token. And if the token won't be provided when accessing this route, or it will be invalid, then the access will be denied. So this is used generally when you have GET requests, you should never change the state of the system. You should always use POST requests to do that, or any other requests that are suited for that. But sometimes we have to do that. And the logout functionality is one example. Ideally, we would have a page. When you click logout, we would go to a page and the system would ask you, do you really want to log out? And then you press a button and you're logged out. But then obviously users would go crazy. So we do change the state for this case. But we enable cross-site request forgery protection on it. Another tool in Drupal that protects us from the same problem, an attacker tricking user to visit a page without them intending to. Like, this is basically what this is about. If an attacker puts some JavaScript code that behind the scenes does a request to this page, they will log out the user from maybe another site. And maybe logout is not a huge problem, but if there is a page that, if you're an admin and if there would be a get page that would give administrator role to a user, to an arbitrary user, that could be exploited by the attacker to grant themselves administrative access to the site. Yeah, if you really want it to be a get route, then definitely use the token. Another tool that we have is those confirm forms that we have. Like if you are on the node listing page and you click a few checkboxes on the list and say delete content, you're always redirected to a confirm form where you have to confirm that you really want to delete this content, and that is a form and that's a post request. So that's another protection for the same or similar problem. So I would say consider confirm form first, and if that's not acceptable for UX reasons, then definitely use the cross-site request forgery token protection system that we have, and it's really easy to use. It's basically just this one line. You add this to a route and Drupal does everything behind the scenes. Since we're talking about tokens, like this is another protection that Form API offers. Like Form API will always add a single-use token to every form, so that when you are submitting the form, you're basically proving that you viewed the form page and then submitted it. It's not somebody trying to trick you to submit the form on your behalf and you're not even knowing about it. So this is another default protection that we have in place in Drupal's Form API. Yeah, and now I will repeat myself, but again, culture and code reviews and attention to detail and preparedness to learn all the time and to follow current best practices, letting people speak up their opinion, not being blamed if they are wrong, or even if they are not. Sometimes people are blamed for speaking against maybe more senior member of the team or something like that. Being open and having this open culture and dedicated to learning culture, it's really something that pays on the long run.